Welcome back to Your Sister, the Doctor. We are talking about truly embodying our anatomy, taking what we learned in school and applying it to actually how we're living our life. Some of us have never really learned how to tune into our bodies, but today you are going to walk away with some tools to help you gain a better awareness of what's actually going on. What is body awareness? Body awareness is simply defined as sensing signals from your muscles and your joints, your tendons and your organs, and all the things that are in your body. Now, there are three components of body awareness. There's your proprioception, which is your ability to tell where your body is oriented in space. It's considered your sixth sense. Then we have interoception, which is the sense of internal bodily function. So it's things like your hunger, your thirst, your heart rate. It's your breath, it's your tension, it's things that you can sense internally. And then we've got vestibular awareness, which is the inner ear. That is your balance and orientation. So why do some people have really poor body awareness? It's because sometimes when you are lacking physical activity, you could become disconnected. When you're in a state of chronic stress, you can become disconnected. If you have a sort of neurological or developmental disorder, that can also disconnect you from your body. So poor body awareness, in turn, can cause stress, anxiety, depression. If you are unable to determine where the sensation in your body is coming from, that can cause stress, and then that kind of loops. Same thing for pain. If you're not really sure why your pain is there, that can cause fear and stress, and that can further dissociate you from the feelings in your body. Having good body awareness will help you with your posture. It'll help you move more efficiently. It'll help prevent injury, and it'll help you with your pain perception. So as far as neuroscience goes, these signals are going to your brain constantly. We just need to learn how to make these signals happen so that we are aware of them. So when I was doing some research for this episode, I actually referred to the book, The Body Keeps the Score, for a lot of things. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about what I've learned from this as far as sensation, and especially with people with PTSD or trauma, that sort of thing. So they've done studies, and they took some people who had trauma and some normal people, and they did MRIs on their brains. And when people are not thinking about anything, they go into kind of like a default mode in their brain. So people who have not undergone trauma, their default mode kind of turns into their sensations. So that's what they start to think about, is like their bodily sensation. Whereas people with a lot of trauma, sometimes those areas don't turn on. So in the study that they did, it actually showed that people with trauma have little self-awareness because these centers in the brain that communicate self-awareness are turned off. So some of the brain structures include the posterior cingulate, which is kind of like your internal GPS. It tells you where you are in space. Your medial prefrontal cortex, so it's a responsive watchtower. And then your insula, emotions, your parietal lobe, which integrates sensory information. Your anterior cingulate, which is for emotions and thinking. So all of these things contribute to your consciousness. So when they put people in the MRI, usually these things light up in the brain, but when they put the people with PTSD in the MRI, the only part of the brain that lit up out of all of those was the posterior cingulate, which is the very basic orientation to space, which tells you very basically your orientation in space. So all the other things related to emotions, those things weren't actually lighting up in the brain. So it goes to show that people who suffer from trauma often dissociate from their body because they are avoiding the fear and the emotions, that they don't want to relive that experience. So as a protective mechanism, your brain actually turns off that function. These patients learned how to shut down those parts of their brain that transmitted their visceral emotions and feelings, because the feelings that were accompanied with the terror, they turned those off, and that in turn turned all the emotion off. It's actually so bad that sometimes, if with some of the patients who had a lot of trauma in their childhood, they don't even recognize themselves in the mirror because that's how traumatized they are. When you're born, sensation is like the first thing that you take into the world. You take in, even in the womb, you're sensing the warmth, the wetness. When you're born, you're sensing warmth, wetness, hunger, thirst, feeling of sleepiness. So this is a very primal thing that, we need to be in touch with because it's so important for just everyday life. Agency is a term that the book talked about, which is a technical term of feeling like you're being in charge of your life. So it starts with interoception, which is the awareness of the subtle internal body feelings that you have. And the greater that awareness of what you can feel internally, the greater ability you have to control your own life. And that sentence really spoke to me because this book here is talking about how if you don't have good awareness of internally what's going on into your body, you're not going to have very good control over your life. But if we are able to tap into what's going on internally into our body, then we will feel like we have better control of the world around us. Because if we can't take care of ourselves first, then how are we going to interact with the world around us? The book said, knowing what we feel is the first step to knowing why we feel that way. And then it went on to talk about how trauma victims can't recover until they are familiar with what they are actually feeling and become familiar with the sensations in their body. If you're always in a frightened state, your body's always going to be on guard. Your muscles are always going to be tense. If you're always angry, your muscles are always going to be angry. If you have a trauma in your past, you're always going to be guarded or tense until you find a way to feel safe and relaxed. So in order to change, people first need to be aware of their sensations. So how do we do that? And, this doesn't always go for people with PTSD. It can be any sort of trauma. I see this a lot in pelvic floor PT when people have been traumatized by X, Y, or Z, whether that be, a milder trauma or a pretty heavy trauma. And then they don't have like the sensation and they don't feel in touch with their body. And maybe the pelvic floor area is very, very unfamiliar to them. And one of their goals in PT might just getting better awareness of the pelvic floor. And luckily, as your sister and as your doctor, the first step in the treatment plan for these patients would be to actually start for awareness, learning how to exercise and how to breathe and how to feel the sensation and center your mind into that area is really helpful. How do you notice your body daily? There are many different modes of doing this. And as a pelvic PT, I go through some of these with my patients. As your sister, I go through some of these personally in my everyday life. So I'll share some of these if you've heard of somatic healing, meditations, things like that. The simplest thing you could do is take a deep breath, which, or learn to breathe with your diaphragm. There's 1,000 different ways to breathe out there. If you look up box breathing technique, that's one that I use with people. There's different numbers, like inhale for 7, hold for 4, exhale for 8, hold for 4. There's lots of different patterns. Box breathing is inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, and you're kind of drawing a box. So it's in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Diaphragmatic breathing, you're thinking about breathing into your rib cage, into your belly, keeping the air out of your chest. So there's lots of different ways that you can breathe. Doing a guided meditation is a really easy thing. There's an app called Insight Timer that is free that you can search up pelvic floor specific meditations or anything that you want, truly. You can just search up a meditation, a guided meditation. You could do it laying down with visualization. There's also body scan. Body scan is really great because you start from your head or your toes and you kind of scan throughout your body. There's progressive muscle relaxation. So you're literally going through head to toe, kind of like a body scan, but you're tightening everything up and then you're loosening everything up. So you're clenching, and then you're letting go gradually. Yoga, Tai Chi, things like that are really great for body awareness. backwards walking. This one's really fun. If you go to the gym and if you're going to be safe about it, stay on the treadmill and walk backwards. And that's going to give you some really great body awareness as to what's going on. Any single leg stability exercises are going to be really helpful. So whether that's like a tree pose in yoga or a single leg deadlift or just balancing on one leg, anything core stability like bird dogs where we're reaching opposite arm, opposite leg, and we're trying to keep the core stable, or we're doing a press and say the band is over here, so we're trying not to rotate toward the band and we're pressing out. Pal-off press, if you've ever heard of that. Those are really great body awareness exercises that you can do because you have to be aware of where your body is and then just breathing. Check in with your feet on the floor. How do they feel? Do you feel like you're grounded into the floor? Gentle movements like squats, hip circles. There's sensory feedback going there. Notice when stress is making you hold tension or a posture is making you hold tension. See if you can breathe into that area. It's not something that needs to be a 30-minute practice to increase body awareness, but integrating it into an exercise routine that you already have could be really helpful. Pelvic floor specific, when you're breathing with your diaphragm, your lungs are here, they're expanding, your diaphragm moves down, your pelvic floor lengthens. So as you inhale, you want to think about the pelvic floor lengthening or blooming like a flower or melting butter. So you're using some visualization to help imagine that the pelvic floor is relaxing. And then if you wanted to try to do a contraction, just gently imagine picking up a little blueberry, lifting up gently with the pelvic floor as you exhale, because that's the way that the diaphragm's moving when you're exhaling. Your pelvic floor is also naturally contracting. Check in with your core and your glutes. I clench my butt when I'm washing my dishes, or I'm clenching my abs when I'm doing something. Can I relax them a little bit? They've done studies on people who are watching scary movies. Their pelvic floor clenches when they do that. They've done studies on people who hold stress in their shoulders. They also hold it in their pelvic floor. And when the stressful stimulus is removed, their shoulders might relax. Their pelvic floor might still stay overactive. And then there's people who, gave birth to a child and then they have a trauma to the pelvic floor area. And now their muscles are always girding because it was a trauma to the area. Body awareness, like we've talked about, is really, really important. It can help you with your balance and your muscle efficiency. It can help you with your posture. It can help prevent injury. And it can help regulate your nervous system. When we ignore the signals from our body, or maybe not even ignore, maybe we just don't know how to listen to them, there's more risk for chronic pain, tension, stress, anxiety, because your mind and your body are so connected. Doesn't matter how strong your muscles are. If you aren't really connected to the awareness of your body, then you're not going to be able to function as well. Proprioception and interoception can be trained. It takes time, but it can be trained by doing physical activity and mind-body work. So, the meditation and the awareness with movement. Pelvic floor awareness is also very important, and I think as women, we do need to be aware of this area. And of all the areas in our body, I would argue that the pelvic floor is one of the more under-aware parts of our body. Like, people don't really think about it until an issue comes up or until they're pregnant. And I think that just having a daily routine, a daily check-in is really important. So it doesn't have to be a huge practice. It can be more like when you wake up in the morning, before you jump out of bed. There's actually a study that I heard, but there was a greater risk of a heart attack if you just jump right out of bed versus if you lay in bed and you take a couple deep breaths before you get out of bed. I think the study said 4 deep breaths and then getting out of bed versus just hearing your alarm and jumping right out of bed, because that would really spike your blood pressure. Tuning into how your body's feeling, your heart rate, your hunger. That also made me think of, I also, when I was doing research, read that there are some studies that indicated that having better body awareness can also help you with weight loss, because you're learning to listen to your body and your hunger cues, and you're not just eating just to eat. Because sometimes when you don't have that awareness of when you need to eat, you could overeat, you could undereat. So, there is evidence that having better body awareness could help you have a healthier weight as well. So when you wake up in the morning, taking a couple deep breaths and just tapping into how your body's feeling, or throughout the day at work, see if you can just check in and relax your shoulders. If you know that you clench your jaw a lot, try to relax. This week, I think if you pick one body part that you notice is always chronically either overactive or underactive, and just like observe it throughout the week, I'd recommend checking this book out if you want to learn a little bit more. I'm sure that we'll still discuss some things from this book. I just want to leave you guys with the first step with embodying anatomy is learning how to tap into how you're feeling internally, your interoception and your proprioception, how you're feeling, where you are in the world. Learning body awareness is a practice. You're not going to get it overnight. And some people have really great body awareness. Some people have really poor body awareness. And just because you fall on one end of the spectrum doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay more or less attention than somebody else. Hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to send me any submissions. If you have a voice memo, if you have any questions about anything as we continue our journey through embodying anatomy. See you guys next week.